Welcome to this episode of Flourishing Leadership. I'm your host, Guy Rogers, and our mission here is to help you unleash the full potential of your leadership calling. You can find out more about Flourishing Leadership at flourishing-leadership.com. My guest today is Dr. Rich Kidd. Rich loves to encourage others to greatness and has ample opportunity to do that as a founding partner at Mission Leadership. As a senior recruiter at both Slingshot Group and the Dingman Company, he specialized in finding executive-level leaders for key positions in a broad array of industries, including Christian nonprofits, large churches, Christian schools and colleges, and mission-minded businesses. He was the former president of Paramount Builders, Virginia's largest home remodeler, and the vice president of operations for a multi-store luxury jewelry business. Rich has operated a consulting practice serving clients from small businesses to large nonprofits, focused on organizational and personal development as well as talent acquisition. In the local church, he has worked in roles from janitor to senior pastor, sometimes simultaneously, which I kind of got a kick out of that one, Rich, ranging from small church plants to large multi-staff churches. Later, he became director of campus ministries for Regent University, where he also taught in the College of Arts and Sciences and the School of Divinity. Rich is a graduate of the College of William and Mary, where he was a Presidential Monroe Scholar, holds an MDiv from Trinity International University, and a doctorate from Fuller Theological Seminary. He's an ordained minister in the Evangelical Presbyterian Church, and he and his wife, Bridget, live in Virginia Beach, Virginia, have 3 children and 2 dogs. And wow, Rich, I just decided I needed to share that entire bio for our listeners because that's a pretty impressive background, my friend.
Well, you probably lost most of your listeners just trying to make it through that.
Well, I hope not. I hope not, because then they'll hear that you've got something really to offer based on not only your learning, but your experience. And as a personal note, listeners, I've had the privilege of working with Rich on some executive searches. We were just talking about a couple of those before we went on air here. So, Rich, I want to thank you. Really want to thank you for taking the time out of, I know, is a very busy day and week to be with us on the Flourishing Leadership podcast.
Well, it's a joy to be here, Guy, and connect with you again. Always learn something and come away encouraged when I spend time with you. So it's a delight to be here with you and those who are listening.
So, first off, before we get into questions, how can people find out more about what you do?
Well, that's a great question, Guy. Being an executive recruiter is one of those things that nobody says they want to be when they grow up because nobody even knows what it is. Sort of like being a fundraiser or something. You just don't have too many hands raised in 5th grade for that on career day. But executive recruiting and the way we do it, we're only in the faith-based world, either, as you mentioned, a business that's faith-inspired, a faith-based nonprofit, or a local church. They can learn about our process and a little bit about our story on our website, which is missionleadership.org. So happy to have folks stop by there and find out more.
Excellent. Missionleadership.org. Okay, so knowing you and your background, as I shared with our listeners, I realized when I was contemplating questions for you, wow, there were so many directions that we could go with this. So I decided to start here. What's the one thing you look for in a leader? That I know there are many traits you would look for, but the one thing that you would consider to be, this is an absolutely indispensable trait that a leader needs to have.
It's a great question, Guy. And in fact, if I could confess, it's the exact same question that I asked when I had a chance to spend some one-on-one time with George Barna. He was on campus at Regent University, and I had some time alone with him. And I said, Mr. Barna, you studied leadership. You've been all around the world doing a deep dive into successful and unsuccessful leaders. What is that one X factor? What's the indispensable trait? And his answer really surprised me. His answer was brokenness. Ooh. He said that in his study that every great leader shares in common some experience of brokenness or humility that prepares them, in biblical terms, to lead with a limp. just like the great Bible character,
Sure.
Jacob, led with a limp because of his experience with God that left him broken. He said that in his experience, great leaders have that area of brokenness or humility. It's what Jim Collins talks about when he describes that level 5 leader. He says that a level 5 leader has a paradoxical blend of personal humility and professional will. So one of the questions that we always ask, and I'll give this one away for free if you ever apply for a job in vision leadership, you'll always get this question. Describe a situation in which you've had to overcome significant difficulties or failure. What did you learn from that experience? I think of all those things that you just read, and maybe, I'm just the kind of person who thinks about what could have been better. I think of the failures and the mistakes and the brokenness that occurred in each of those experiences in leadership that I've had, and ways that I would have done it differently if I had to do over. And so, that ability to fail forward, to, as the software development people tell us, to fail fast and to fail forward, that learning and that brokenness, where often the bones that God heals are stronger than when we started. So that's what we asked for. And it's amazing the stories that we hear, and leaders who've learned to be humble.
That's really powerful. And it's interesting that you bring that up. George and I actually, on an interview several weeks ago, we had this conversation, and he brought it up then as well. He talked about brokenness. He was very transparent about a very difficult time in his life. And
well, I'm glad that he hasn't changed his answer, because I've been quoting him ever since.
No, I think he's gotten real consistent there. And for sure, it's his own experience, as you've talked about yours. I shared a little bit of mine. And it's interesting how that aspect of brokenness, or not having brokenness, affects how well a person can go forward. There's so many biblical examples and historical examples of God raising up Christian leaders. And that brokenness is a common theme of everyone that I'm familiar with.
Yeah. Brokenness is really the wellspring of empathy, isn't it? That, when you have achieved some level of success, the ability to look, down into the organization and to see emerging leaders and aspiring leaders and to equip them. And, I've studied the life and ministry of the Apostle Paul, and I honestly, I don't think that he came as a very empathetic sort.
Right.
When you read about some of his statements in Philippians, he said, according to the requirements of righteousness, I was blameless. He's that kid in Sunday school who knows all the answers before they're asked. And, he was a pretty proud guy. Of course, God humbled him, but he was a pretty intense leader. And you get that sense when he's with the Apostle Barnabas and they're on a mission trip, and John Mark decides he wants to head out. The going got tough and John Mark got going. And so when it came time to pick sides again, Paul's like, heck no, I'm not taking you. You gave up on us last time. And Barnabas said, no, emerging leaders deserve a second chance. And it's the only time in the Bible that we find somebody saying negative things about Barnabas. It says that Barnabas and Paul had a paroxysm, literally. They had a brouhaha, a Donnybrook. Right. Over emerging leaders. And It was basically because Paul was of the opinion, hey, if you mess up, that's it. You're not going to be on my team. And Barnabas, the son of encouragement, said, no, we got to give emerging leaders a second chance. And so I really think that that's crucial to leadership, is the ability to equip, to encourage, to give people enough room that they can fail and learn from that experience.
I think the key is what you just said, learn from the experience, because I also know of some people who they have failed multiple times and they don't seem to learn anything from them. It's like they keep repeating the same things over and over again, and the valuable God life lessons escape them for whatever reason.
Yeah, it is sad. John Maxwell says that some people have 25 years of experience, some some people have 1 year of experience 25 times.
Yeah, right.
So that learning is the crucial piece, and reflection is always the hyphen in service learning, right? It's reflecting on that. And I believe that's exactly what happened to Paul, because that happens in Acts chapter 15. Acts chapter 16, you see his decision to take Timothy along on his journey. And that would have meant he was taking Timothy as an apprentice. He was taking him to, into St. Paul's University, if you will, to study, to become a rabbi. And Timothy couldn't have been more than 15, 16 years old at the time. So what I believe is that Paul reflected on Barnabas' mercy, his ability to give people a second chance, and he learned. He didn't make that same mistake again. He brought Timothy along for the journey, and that changed Timothy's life. And not only that, at the end of his life, apparently after Barnabas had passed, he was calling for John Mark to be with him, and he had found the value. I suppose it was obvious by then he'd written a book of the New Testament, and so Paul could see he was wrong about that. But he didn't make the same mistake again. And you're right, learning from our failure is the crucial piece.
So let's flip the coin here, and it may be an obvious flipping of the coin. None of us bring perfection to the table, obviously. We bring our weaknesses as well as our strengths. We bring our shortcomings, whatever those may be. So what would you say then to emerging leaders, current leaders, wherever they are in their station in life, their season in life, is the one trait you believe absolutely needs to be not part of their character, or at least something that is so diminished doesn't play a major role in how they live and how they lead?
Yeah, I'm going to mark myself with the traditional moral theologians and say pride, hubris. The scriptures tell us that, pride comes before a fall and a haughty spirit before destruction. And, I understand that. I understand the feeling of, hey, I've put in my time. I know what I'm talking about. I don't have to listen to you. Pride creates blind spots. It makes you so focused on what you want, what you think that you're supposed to be doing, whether that's in a kind of a Christian context or just a regular marketplace context. You can have market leaders that, get so comfortable on top of the market that they forget what business that they're in. We often hear about the Xerox company. We forget that what got us there. It creates blind spots. I think pride ignores limitations. John Mark Comer says something I think is so good. He says, one of the key tasks of our apprenticeship to Jesus is living into both our potential and our limitations. Mm-hmm. And pride says, I don't have any limitations. Mm-hmm. I have nothing but potential, and the sort of worldly idea of self-help and find your own truth, live according to your heart, whatever the mantra is in every Disney flick. But that ignores the fact that every hero has limitations, and we all have limitations. And so I know in my own life, I have blown through every stop sign at times doing good work, thinking that it was, I was different, that I had unlimited energy. I had unlimited creativity. I had unlimited wisdom and discernment, that I didn't have to slow down. I didn't have to take breaks. My wife's been the voice of wisdom for 30 years now, saying, maybe it'd be good for you to take a break. And I just, think I'm too important, that if I'm not on the job, things are going to fall apart. And that's really pride, isn't it? That makes us ignore those limitations. So I've seen many, leaders have blind spots. And unfortunately, we're seeing that all too common these days, with people falling out of leadership at a rapid pace because of those blind spots. They don't put in checks and balances like they should. And, in a well-meaning way, they just don't observe their own limitations. They don't have Sabbath in their life. They don't have a rhythm that creates the character that will sustain leadership for a lifetime. So I do think pride, hubris is that downfall.
So in a sense, we are talking two sides of a coin here, because
I think you're right.
Brokenness is, if not the primary, certainly one of the primary ways in which God deals with that pride issue. that self-absorption, that, the more talented and gifted a person is, clearly they have great vulnerability to pride in the self-sufficiency, because let's face it, as they move forward in life, they have success, right? They're achieving. And the more you achieve without brokenness, the bigger the blind spots can get. You really think you can do everything, right?
Yeah. What is it they say? Believing your own press. That's what the Pharisees would do right before they would do something great. They'd have somebody blow a trumpet, so everybody turn around and see what they were doing. Maybe they were tweeting about it, or maybe they were, having an Instagram post to let everybody know what a great leader they were. And, honestly, I interact with a lot of younger leaders, and everyone is hungry for their platform, right? And I understand. I mean, content marketing works, and to get your message out there and to have a way that you can share your potential, if you will, to look at John Mark's two sides of his coin. Sharing your potential is great, and putting your message out there is great. But if you look at opportunities of leadership as a platform for your message, then you're kind of missing Jesus' point that leadership is a platform to wash people's feet. It's a position of service that says, how can I help? How can I help you achieve what God has called you to do? And if you're so worried about talking, I've discovered you don't have much time to listen. So
going back to George Barna, I called him in early 2020 when I was considering, and I pretty much made the decision that I would launch out into a professional leadership coaching practice. I'd gone through 18 months of training for that with the Professional Christian Coaching Institute, left Pinnacle Forum. And I remember one of the things he said. He said, Guy, in all of my research, he said, I find that people who are really maturing and growing, I'm paraphrasing here a little bit, but I think I'm capturing it well, growing in their leadership, in their call to serve Christ, they have a place of fellowship, a church, they have some kind of small group dynamics, so they have more intimacy. But he said what many of them are missing is they don't have a guide. You can call it a mentor, a discipler, whatever. We don't have integrated throughout the church in America this sense that to walk on with Christ, you really need someone who's walked the path before you, who can help you with those blind spots, who you trust to speak into your life encouragement, but also speak into your life with warning and caution and awareness, because we can't see everything about ourselves. And it struck me that when I was at Pinnacle Forum, there was one particular vocation more than any other that, from what I could see, lacked these types of guides, and it was pastors.
Wow.
And
well, it's not the way it's supposed to be. And certainly the Bible knows nothing of, church ministry outside of the plurality of local elders who are exactly intended to give that kind of check and balance. But to your point, the way, often church works is that those people are just kind of enthralled by the leader rather than giving checks and balances to the leader. Obviously, I'm a Presbyterian on purpose, and we have, gradated courts of accountability that are intended to bring accountability to ministers and provide those guides. But I would imagine that your coaching is just the kind of guidance and sage wisdom that young leaders especially need. I'm really glad that you went in that direction, because we all need it.
Well, and I can look back on my own life, and while there are times I wish I'd had someone as a mentor, the most transformational period of my life as a young believer from 1978 to 82, I was discipled by the man I call my spiritual father. He was the president of a Bible school. And for 4 years, he invested himself in me, totally changed the trajectory of my life. And here was what was interesting. Because I was a relatively young Christian, I got saved at a Young Life camp at age 18 out of an entirely, thoroughly unchurched home. So I came into Christianity with very little knowledge. Going through that experience with him and all that did, I emerged from that assuming, well, here's what we see in the scriptures. We see it both Old Testament. We see it certainly in New Testament. Jesus, 12 disciples, how that works. Then this process of discipleship must be normative in Christianity. And I discovered over the course of the next 30 years, it isn't normative at all. And it has always puzzled me as to why that is. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Certainly in the church, I believe discipleship became less of an emphasis because of the emphasis in the revivalistic tradition on conversion. And there was a real misunderstanding that conversion was more of an experience than a process. And so if the whole goal is for someone to have an experience, then you spend all your money on fog machines and light machines and sound systems, and you spend very little on ways of helping them experience a process of life's transformation. So I think our theology got in the way of discipleship somewhere along the way.
Yeah, and I think another aspect of this is how, and George talks about this too, the things that pastors use to measure whether they're successful or not. He talks about five of them, says, the number of people, the number of staff, the square footage of a building, the size of the budget, which none of those things are necessarily bad in and of themselves. But as he said on the podcast, he said, but how much do they really have to do with the process of discipling believers as Jesus commanded in Matthew, 28 in the Great Commission? He said, go out and disciple the nations. It's really building leadership, Rich. Isn't it? It does. Yeah. Discipling is building leadership from a more mature leader to a less mature leader so that they can do the same, and we keep replicating.
Yeah. Well, I want to call out two places where I have seen it because it's easy to focus on the problem and never come to a solution. I happen to know Greg Leith. I'm sure you do too at Convene, and Mike Sharrow at C12. Yep. Mm-hmm. I think that those are two excellent vehicles that have taken that principle of guidance, of coaching, of an experienced hand who comes along for insight, wisdom, and guidance, and really encouraging business owners to look at their business as a mission and to measure it not just by the bottom line of dollars and cents, but by lives changed, of people equipped, transformed, and giving a practical context of accountability to those metrics that aren't just dollars and cents. And so there are, I believe, bright spots out there, convening groups, C12 groups that are really helping people make those kinds of changes in the marketplace and in the church as well.
Yeah, good point, Rich. I would agree with that. I guess my heart's desire would be that this approach would become so much more common that we would notice it as being common rather than as being more unexceptional. Anyway.
Well, just on a personal note, I have always been interested in discipleship and got to know a gentleman named Greg Ogden. Don't know if you know him, but his book, Discipleship Essentials, and before that, The New Reformation, really proposed that was a pastor's goal. His whole mission was to equip the saints for the work of the ministry. And so I was in a prayer time with him and said, man, I really want my life to be about equipping others, and I need some training in that. And he says, well, at the risk of sounding, kind of self-aggrandizing here, I happen to lead a doctoral program at Fuller Theological Seminary that I believe does just that. We were once known for church growth. I want us to be known for church health. And that's how I started my doctorate at Fuller under Greg's direction. And so I really did a deep dive into discipleship as a journey and how we can lead leaders, churches, and individuals through this journey of growth to be more like Jesus. So that was a life-changing time for me. Love Greg Ogden.
So you've experienced that. I've experienced that. My encouragement to listeners would be a discipler as well as be discipled. If you want to call it mentoring, whatever, but coaching, but be in a place where you have relationships where there are those that are discipling, mentoring you, and you're also then doing this with others. That's my encouragement to listeners. It's the primary reason I became a leadership coach, because it is a form of mentoring and allows me to be able to be someone who can help leaders become better leaders. It's why I do what I do. It was done for me. I want to pass it on to others. It's what you do. So just want to really encourage listeners in this regard to look at your life and that and see what you have and what you could be gaining and what you could also be offering. So Rich, I want to end with a question here. And this one probably is a tough one because there are so many people that you could think of. But as you look across the Christian landscape in America, who would you name as a preeminent servant leader and why?
Wow. I would certainly say my wife, though nobody will ever have a chance to meet her. She is the most unsung servant, always looking to the needs of others. She has always seen her calling as counseling. She counsels children who were adopted or in foster care, which was her experience. So first of all, I would, kind of start there. I know that that's probably not what you were thinking about, but I'm sure that there are unsung leaders like her all over the country who are leading and loving and caring and, equipping and encouraging in ways that we'll never see. But I think that what you mean is maybe a leader that people have heard of. So I'll kind of take an easy way out for a minute, then I'll give you another one. But Tim Keller, who is, of course, no longer with us, had really an amazing breadth of impact. I've had opportunity to serve in finding leaders for a number of the organizations that he started. And so I've been able to see some of the depth of what God was able to do. If a storm comes and a tree in your yard is uprooted, you see the real secret of the success of the tree, right? It's not the branches, it's not the fruit, it's not the leaves, it's those roots. And if you look at the roots that went down in New York City, some of the most unfriendly place to grow a church, it was notorious among church planters, but God really used him. In terms of church planting, you've got City to City, which has planted churches all over the globe, not Presbyterian. Tim Keller is a Presbyterian. The churches that they plant around the world are not Presbyterian. They cooperate with all kinds. They're building seeing the kingdom of God expanding. Service, Love and Justice, Hope for New York, this amazing organization that unifies all kinds of service organizations in New York City and gives them training, helps them understand best practices, coordinates manpower for their needs, and brings about donations that help their cause. Again, this is other-centered. It's serving the city. It's not serving themselves. It's people that, will never darken the door of a Presbyterian church, but because of his ministry are lifted up. And then, of course, the local church congregations. And at a time when, senior pastors and teaching pastors everywhere were expanding their platform. And I'm not trying to, knock anybody who, have multi-site, and multi-site's a wonderful tool in many instances, but he went the opposite direction. He equipped and empowered local congregational pastors to congregationalize, and where he could have kept building Redeemer Central bigger and bigger and bigger, he pushed out, and those 5 congregations are all healthy today, even though he left much sooner than anybody would have wanted. It was no accident that after his death, the very first post-COVID unified worship service was on the day that his passing was announced. And so those churches were together and they worshiped, and they're the fruit of those roots that God put deep there in New York City. So I greatly respect his leadership.
Yeah, and a great example of speaking into the lives of others and equipping them to lead.
Absolutely.
Just what we're talking about.
Another leader I greatly respect is Pastor John Jenkins at First Baptist of Glenarden. Not only is Pastor Jenkins, he's a dear friend, but not only is he a local church pastor at a church that's just exploded over the years, but he also gives leadership to Converge, his denomination. He's, leading the whole denomination at this time, as well as, chairman of the board at NAE. And so I've had opportunity to work alongside of him at one of his passion projects called Project Bridges, which unites over 50 African-American, primarily African-American churches in and around Washington, D.C., the DMV area. And talk about servant leader. I mean, this guy, can fly his own plane and show up in your local city. He equips others. He's remarkably generous across the board. He's a dynamic speaker, but it's in giving away leadership, I think, that his greatness is shown. So I just mentioned two. I could mention many others. Tom Lynn, InterVarsity, who's the leader there. I've had opportunity to serve him. It just raw intelligence. Tom Lynn is one of the smartest people I know. He is godly. He is generous. He's joyful. Just the impact of a joyful leader who's rooted and grounded in relationships and is not so task focused that they forget people. Man, there's just so many great models that are out there.
Oh, Rich, we could go on and on talking about this, couldn't we? I mean, so we've got those examples out there and they inspire us and encourage us. And we need to look to those, not in some kind of, for lack of a better phrase, hero worship, but in this is an example to look to and see, okay, what kind of lives do they live and what does it teach me? What does it tell me? So good examples. And I appreciate you starting with your wife. I would actually do the same thing. My wife is amazing. I call her my extraordinary woman. She lives a life of joy that, frankly, I'm still learning to emulate. So good place to start. Rich, it's been a pleasure having you on today. Thank you for the time and your insights for this conversation. And I look forward to staying connected with you in the future.
Well, you could sum up my whole life calling as I know a guy. So I'm glad I know a guy. You're the guy to know. I'm just so glad to know you. So thanks so much for having me on, Guy. It's been tremendous. I hope you have a wonderful, wonderful December.
You too. As a certified professional leadership coach, I have the privilege of working with leaders of all ages and backgrounds, C-level executives, nonprofit leaders, small business owners, self-employed professionals. I am passionately driven to help each of these men and women be better servant leaders every day. In this podcast, my goal is to help you do the same. That's my calling. That's my mission. If this message today speaks to you, please subscribe to this podcast by searching Flourishing Leadership with Guy Rogers on your favorite podcast app, or you can find it on my YouTube channel, youtube.com/Flourishing Leadership. And please let your friends and colleagues know about it. Check us out at flourishing-leadership.com, where you can learn more about my leadership coaching approach, methodology, and how it can help you, and where you can also find all the podcast episodes. Because today, your leadership, flourishing leadership, has never been more needed.